What is good, Cool Cats and Kittens Nation? Welcome to the playoffs and congratulations for finishing the third regular season of CCK. It's been a memorable season for sure. I've been thinking about how to do this video because I don't think the regular format really makes sense. But in thinking through it, I wanted to actually highlight some of the storylines from this season as we head into the postseason. Because there are some certainly memorable storylines that were sticking with us all throughout the season. But first, I wanted to kick it off with us sort of going down the memory lanes. We started out thanks to our gracious hosts in Boston, John, Ryan, and Brad. Debauchery ensued in our Airbnb. We had some good fun, some good steaks, and really the first highlight event was the golf game, the CCK Cup, the second one. The newbies of our league, Kevin and Brad, with some tremendous highlights from both of them in the course, and made Bills Mafia 2-0 in the CCK Cup history in the process. Travis was hungover, and Team Canada finished last. Depending on where our next gathering takes place, we may be up for a breakup of Team Canada for the future CCK Cup seasons. Sergey did us all proud by taking the first Toilet Bowl King penalty like a champ and went significantly under on the line that we had set by putting up 11 minutes and change on the beer mile. The rookie draft, we finished off the weekend with our rookie draft. Looking back on the season, some massive wins are already evident. CJ Stroud going 107 to Brandon, a luxury pick for him at the time that converted into Tyreek Hill to immediately put him back into contender category, especially after being affected by so many injuries. We had Rashee Rice that Sergey picked up with the 202, who now looks like the best rookie wide receiver in the class in the late season as he's turned into KC's wide receiver one from increasing snap shares each and every week. Devon Achane at 206 to Moncton Meerkats, who might have been the runaway steal of the draft if it wasn't for all the injuries and the time that he missed. But from a per game standpoint, he's sitting at RB3. So in terms of value, Tank Dell at 310 to Bills Mafia also seems like a really nice long-term dynasty piece as he's currently wide receiver 13 on Keep Treated Cut. But the real steal of the draft has to be Puka Nacua this season, who Brad picked up with the 403 as he's currently the wide receiver 9 in terms of dynasty value on Keep Trade Cut. Hitting on picks like that is what I get excited about for Brad's future, and I think Brad has a real shot to make the playoffs next year. He's got a real solid roster already, and Kevin, also speaking of another expansion manager, already has a real shot to make the playoffs next year, and I think he might be sneakily well placed for next year as well, because keep in mind, AR-15 Anthony Richardson, who Kevin picked up with the 102, was putting up a top 10 fantasy football points per week prior to being shut down for the rest of the season due to injuries. And Kevin also snagged Jordan Addison as a result of him moving down from the 101 with Brandon. And he picked up Will Levis with the 205, who's showing signs of the potential franchise quarterback for the Titans. So then the season rolled in, and immediately off the bat, Eve scored the league worst of 22.24, setting the stage for the expectations for the rest of the season for the two-shot Snow Cup, the once daunting opponent that you didn't want to face, now becoming the softest matchup all season. That said, Eve has steadily increased his points for throughout the season by being very active on the waivers to pick up a reliable QB2. I appreciate your activity, Eve, even during a tank season, but you might have set the record for the lowest points for in a regular season that may stay with us for a very, very long time with that 22 points in week one. At 62.3 points a week for the entire season, Eve averaged less than 50% points for from the fifth best manager in our league, and then representing less than 40% from the first place Trusted Process, my team's average of 160. Moving to the second storyline, I want to talk about how injuries has plagued us all, but Brandon's been hit the most. In the early part of the season, there were a lot of injuries as well. But like I said, I don't think anyone's been impacted more long-term than Bills Mafia, because he immediately lost Nick Chubb, J.K. Dobbins in the early season, and continued the bad luck by losing Mark Andrews as well, and a surging Tank Dell, who was putting up elite numbers in the midseason to help boost Brandon's output, but then also lost him to a season-ending injury as well. So, this isn't including the midseason injuries who missed some games like Austin Eckler did. But Brandon was, able to benefit from the historically early soft schedule. And he also ended up finishing the regular season with the lowest points against for the season as well. So he put up a good start and ultimately finished at 11-3 with the contention to be able to get that second seed into that 14th week. But it was largely off of the low scoring averages that he got because of the soft schedule. But it was originally looking like a definitely a first round exit in the playoffs for Bills Mafia. But that trade deadline acquisition of Tyreek Hill, along with some surging players in the late season in Tank Dell, was quickly able to get him back up and playing his best weeks heading into the playoffs, now firmly in the contender tier. I thought the second storyline was interesting for the season. I also want to talk about it because it's the other side of the matchup between Bills Mafia's lucky start of the soft schedule. Man, after a disappointing week one sneaking out a victory over Mr. Ambassador, it's a huge dicko. Had also the worst luck in terms of points against I think I've ever seen in fantasy football, my fantasy football experience. He started off 1-6 to start the season, even though he was outputting on points for that was clearly in the playoff tier. I believe he was hovering between 5th and 6th all season. But his bad luck on points against continued, though, as both of the league record-setting, the two 230-plus point performances we had this season happened against him. First in Week 8 by Trust the Process, and in Week 13 by Mocked Meerkats. Thankfully, he snuck his way into the playoffs thanks to the olive branch by Brad. But he ended the season with 1,958 points against him. By the way, if that amount was a single team, it would qualify as the third highest scoring manager this season. And also the gap from his points against sitting at first to the second being at 275. It's 65 points higher than the gap between the second place against the easiest points against, which is at 210 held by Brandon. So Travis basically had an average of 140 points being scored against him every single week. Again, I've never seen it, but congrats on making the playoffs. Get dangerous now. Storyline 3, I got to talk about my hot start. Obviously, I had a disappointing week 1, meeking out a victory over Mr. Ambassador, but started the season hot, averaging 170 through the first 10 weeks or so on the heels of DeAndre Swift resurging and Travis Etienne and a healthy Keenan Allen. Ultimately going 12-0 before losing to a tough matchup against Bills Mafia in 13, but sort of sputtering into the playoffs as the playoff Swift, Hall, Etienne, as well as the expected downgrades now to Keenan Allen, along with the injuries to players like Justin Jefferson and Jonathan Taylor really putting question marks as we close out the season. The last, second to last storyline here is I want to say that Moncton Meerkat stayed largely with the same roster all throughout the season. And I think he was really, really underrated in the early parts of the season, as I mentioned, but certainly he's a now fully appreciated contender. If it wasn't for the exact same roster that he had, so Moncton Meerkats stayed largely with the same roster. I think he might have actually stayed with the same exact roster, actually. But even though it was relatively in the background for him, where he actually, in the early parts of the season, his success was actually relatively in the background. But when we ran the math in week 10 with the midseason analysis, he had scored as many top 2 scoring outputs as Trust the Process in the first half of the year. And also in the last few weeks, Moncton Meerkats has now hit a new gear, highlighted by a scoring record of 234 output in week 13. So certainly a favorite, and we'll talk about that in the power rankings in a little bit. The last storyline that I want to sort of talk about, I love that we had the 6th playoff seed, the final seed for the playoffs race, going all throughout the season and into week 14, or week 13 at least. Through the first 7 weeks of the season, by the way, Travis was sitting at 1-6, and it looked very much likely that Wooksy would be able to take the 6th and final stop because Travis was sitting 2 games behind. Travis ended up catching up to Wooksy by week 11 by winning 4 straight. But Brad was still the favorite, as Brad was going to be facing the easiest 3 weeks to finish out the regular season, whereas Travis was facing his toughest 3 weeks. Ultimately, the race, like I said, was decided on week 13, with Wooksy losing to Sergey in week 12 and conceding to Eve in week 13. That ensured Travis would win the 6th seed on a tiebreaker, no matter the outcome of week 14 matchups. But this one stayed close. And by the way, none of us had an expansion manager making the playoffs this year in terms of preseason predictions. I honestly think Wooksy would have had a chance to finish out the season with a 500 record and make the playoffs had he wanted to pursue a playoff spot for his debut season. And I mentioned this earlier, but with another top 4 pick and either the 11th or the 12th pick in the upcoming rookie draft, Wooksy is a pick for me to contend for a playoff spot next season easily. All right, so that does it for the memory lanes of our Boston trip and the season, sort of the 6 major storylines that I could think about over the last couple of days that I want to highlight with you. So let's go into our favorite section, Nostradamus picks, because we had some moves this week. All right, so on the 2 Shots No Cup Braves Dynasty, everyone put on Braves Dynasty, but with Aaron Jones being a late scratch, it was fascinating because we had 2 Shots No Cup only losing because of a point. But at the end of the day, all of us got this one right. And moving on to matchup number 2, we had Trusted Process going to Huge Dicka, taking the win, finishing out the season at 13-1. All of us got this one right as well. Matchup 3 between Wooksy Fingerhold and Kevin Yip was 50-50. It was actually pretty close. And it's fascinating that Brad was actually trying to lose this matchup against Kevin so that there's a chance that Sergey jumps him into the 7th seed, which means that Brad would have faced Kevin instead of facing a for sure loss with Eve, a win against them. It's easier for him to win against Eve and advance to the next round of the toilet bowl and get better odds at the lottery than if he was facing Kevin, for example. So he ended up starting Tommy DeVito ahead of Tua, and it would have been much closer. He still would have won had he started Tua, but Tua ended up scoring much less than Tommy DeVito. So I thought that was funny. Thankfully, it didn't alter any of the scenarios, but fun outcome nonetheless. And then matchup number 4 had Bills Mafia against Mr. Ambassador. This was obviously a must-win for Bills Mafia to have a chance to get into the 2nd seed, because John's game, the matchup between Moncton Meerkats and the Full Jerry, actually went down to the wire. There was really a chance that Full Jerry could have made it, but I think Saquon Barkley having 2 touchdowns, that's what sealed it. Had Saquon had 1 touchdown, Full Jerry would have won because of the yardages implied on the touchdown. He also would have gotten on that 6 plus the 6 points. And if so, Full Jerry would have been the only one right on this prediction pick'ems. But alas, 9 out of 10 managers got this one right as well. So looking over to the pick'em totals tallies through the regular season 14 weeks, got some movement. We have 4 perfect pick'ems this week in a week with the current leader, me, going 4 out of 5. So now the competition's gotten even tighter. It's officially a 3-way tie for first at 58 between Ryan, Kyle, and me, with Even John tied at 4th, sitting at 55. So 3 games back, still plenty of time to make up. We've got this week, we've got next week, and we got week 17 in terms of the matchups. So we've got almost just a slightly over, I think we got 10 matchups remaining. So we got 4 here, 5 next week, and then week 17, I believe, will just be 2 matchups. So we got 11 matchups left. Plenty of ability for this to turn the tide, especially come playoffs. No one knows what's going to happen, especially the best ball. I think that's going to be the one that's going to be tough for everyone to bet. So this one is going to go down to the final week, I believe, which is exciting. All right, so this is the last week I do the power rankings. I think I mentioned this as that last week was the last regular season. This is going to be the official last week of power rankings all throughout, going into the playoffs now. The seedings are all set. The matchups are all set. So ahead of the last power rankings for the seasons, I wanted to show an updated chart from the regular season outputs that I did in week 10 for the midseason. So between Trust the Process and Moncton Meerkats, if you look at it, Moncton Meerkats actually led. He went a perfect against the median. So all weeks at 5 or better. And then he also tied with Trust the Process in terms of the number of weeks at top 2, which was 9. And Trust the Process and Moncton Meerkats tied and finished the season at 107-19 against all play. That would be if you played against everyone every single week. And then Bills Mafia came in second at 82-44, where he had 11 wins against the median, and 4 weeks above in the top two. But what's really, really interesting, take a look at full Jerry's numbers too. So he was very close, a game behind Bills Mafia in terms of all play. Basically just a game less than Bills Mafia in terms of the wins against the median. And he was also able to sneak out a top two finish as well. So John's going to be a threatening player that's going to be dangerous in the playoff time. We got Brady Stir Dynasty also not too far behind, but also having had some massive weeks in the first 4 weeks. But I think that's going to be adjusted. Most of that came in the early first 10 weeks of the season before the trade with Tyreek. But he ended up finishing fifth best at 76-50 against the all play. And then here's the biggest difference in the all. Not only the difference of the current wins against the actual record, but in Huge Dicka, he ended up finishing with obviously 5 wins for the season, but against the median, he actually had 9. So 4 less wins than what he should have gotten against the median. And all play, he's actually sitting at a solid, sixth? Yeah, a solid sixth. A big gap between him and the seventh, which is Wooksy at 69-57, and all others had a losing record against the median. Obviously, Kevin actually never had a week above the median and won 4, so he was a big beneficiary in terms of what his records did at. But that said, all these numbers are now being factored into my final power rankings. So let's go through them. The power rankings are based on the probability of winning it all for the playoffs. And the numbers in terms of the winning for probability is actually from Fantasy Pros. So just using the numbers there. We got the top 3. There's movement finally at the number 1. I've got Moncton Meerkats at number 1, taking the number 1 seed after the entire year was held by me at the top. Trust the Process now moves down to 2. The probability, actually, if you think about what these percentages imply, the probability of Bills Mafia, Trust the Process, Moncton Meerkats, like I said last week, it's pretty much a toss-up between all 3. The reason there's such a big gap at Trust the Process and Moncton Meerkats with Bills Mafia sitting at 17 is solely because of the projections on the fact that Bills Mafia has to beat his Week 15 matchup against Huge Dicka. And so even if you imply a 60% win probability, that's how you ultimately get to that 17% chance of Bills Mafia for the ultimate contendership. But these odds will even out significantly by Week 16's matchup, especially if Bills Mafia is able to advance. So the likelihood, like I said last week, in my own calculations, I had these 3 at 80% on fantasy, 80% between the 3, and that's what's got Fantasy Pros as well. So moving on to number 4, got some movements. I got Full Jerry at number 4, actually. Full Jerry actually on Fantasy Pros is at 12% possibility to win it, which is actually quite heavy. And it's factoring in, by the way, the Justin Herbert injury. So I'm wondering if Herbert wasn't there, I wonder what it had been looking like. But 12% was a lot higher than I thought. Because in order to get to 12%, it actually implies that if you're playing Week 15, Week 16, and Week 17, which you'd have to win all 3 in order for you to win it all, that 12% really is that he's got a 50% chance to win Week 15, then he's got 50% chance to win Week 16, and then he's got a 50% chance to win Week 17. 50% turning into 25%, turning to 12.5%, just something slightly under that, a hair under that is what Fantasy Pros thinks that John's got. So it's basically a coin flip all the way through is what that represents. And then interestingly, here's another movement. They've got Huge Dicka at the 5th highest at 5%, with Brady Stir Dynasty sitting at 3%. Anyways, none of this really was my rankings. I just put the Fantasy Pros odds in here in terms of power rankings, but I was really surprised. I originally had Brady Stir Dynasty at 5th. I definitely had John at 4 because I liked his ability to beat Ryan this week. But yeah, this is what Fantasy Pro has. And so for the remaining power rankings, I'll start in a reverse based on the likelihood to be the Toilet King. So for the Toilet Bowl, I got Eve most likely to win. I actually got him, this doesn't show up on Fantasy Pros, but I actually have Eve's likelihood to win and get the 40% odds, the best odds at the 101 at 65%. By the way, that basically represents something like an 80% lose rate, 80% lose rate. So it's pretty massively high. I got him at 65, 70%, somewhere there. He's definitely number 10 for me because of that. He's also got a favorable matchup against Wuxi, who is definitely the strongest out of the toilet bowl as his first week 15 matchup. And then I've got Kevin at 9 and Sergey at 8. I should sort of flip these, but yeah, I got Kevin at 9 and Sergey at 8. I think it's pretty close between the two in terms of Kevin and Sergey in terms of their matchups, but I got Kevin at about a 60% chance of losing to Sergey for me in their week 15 matchup. So the numbers should be reversed here. Wuxi at 7, Mr. Ambassador 8, and Kevin at 9. So toilet bowl is based on best ball, however, so it's always tough to predict. And I will say this, that while I think Wuxi's bad weeks are still better than Two Shots No Cup's best weeks in terms of points for, in terms of Kevin and Mr. Ambassador's season-long max points for, it's actually very, very close. I believe it's 117 for Mr. Ambassador and 114 or 113 for Kevin. So it's going to be interesting to see what sort of happens. But now, looking at the actual sort of matchup themselves, every single week, by the way, for the rest of the season is going to be worth tracking, and anything goes. One good week, you advance. One bad week, you are done. So for the toilet bowl, it's really difficult for me to predict anything because it's on max points forward. And even Eve has had weeks where he can output good enough weeks to surprisingly beat Wuxi on like really bad weeks on max points forwards. I think there was like 2 weeks where that happened. So it's a distinct possibility. But like I said, between Kevin and Mr. Ambassador, they have a similar max points for output per week. So that's really close to toss up 60-40 again for for Kevin's ability to lose that matchup. But, so nothing really worth noting for me or something that I'm capable of looking at for the toilet bowl and predictions. So let's move into the playoff matchup. And I'll have the slides for this. I'll talk through it. So I will say that the full Jerry and the Brady Store Dynasty matchup, full Jerry's got to be feeling pretty good about his play in the closing weeks of the season. And then that being paired with Brady Store Dynasty struggling in week 13 and week 14, where Ryan's only averaged 108 points in those 2 weeks. So whoever wins this matchup, I look forward to beating you in week 16. For Hugh Jicka and Bills Mafia matchup, I'm actually really intrigued about this. So obviously Bills Mafia is the favorite, but I think Travis actually has a chance to make some noise. Hugh Jicka obviously benefits from his players' soft schedules this week as well, with Brandon's 2 difference makers on Bills Mafia's team facing tough matchups and Mahomes against a decent to good New England defense for quarterback output in fantasy, and then Tyreek also facing Sauce Gardner all game going up against the Jets. So that said, Evan Ingram has been the unsung hero for Bills Mafia, and it's an underrated pickup, especially with Mandrews being out for him late in the season. Ingram has actually been the tight end 1 since week 12. And on top of that, there's easy matchups for Bijan and Jameer. So selfish, of course, I'm rooting for you, Travis. Go complete your R. Kelly redemption storyline arc. But this is going to be a really interesting matchup that I'll be keeping an eye on. So anyways, folks, Kyle and I will be enjoying the roller coaster of emotions from all you guys in week 15, just watching it, taking all in from the sidelines. So enjoy the first week of the postseason, and good luck, boys. The chase for the ring and the one-on-one is on. Peace.